This is, once again, a gentleman that I met. He's lectured in different parts of Tucson that I've been privileged to be at. He speaks on Operation Mind Control. So right now I think we all should introduce Walter Bowart. Thanks, Walter. It's a long reach here, buddy, but thanks for coming on. We put you on the hot seat.
Yeah,
Yes,
You
up
know,
on the
we got these
pedestal.
lights over you. You know, we're
Electrodes
gonna, you know, we feel our minds going.
Yes.
You've got control.
Right, my mind hasn't been under control for years.
Okay, okay. You don't have any remote controls with you?
No.
Do you? Okay, we're safe.
Totally out of control.
This is a heck of a book. Is there that much stuff going on?
Half of the book I wrote in a unrevised, I updated it and revised it, and then it's all, half of it's new material. 23 years ago I began this quest. A friend of mine came back from tour of duty with the United States Air Force, and he had amnesia and he had hyperamnesia. And I knew his family. I'd grown up with him, and I began to do research, and it took me to Washington, D.C., and I was right here in Tucson when it started. And of course out here I was crazy and alone. You know, nobody knew about this, nobody believed this, but the closer I got to D.C., the more people knew about it. And you'd meet somebody in D.C. and he'd, what are you doing here? And you say, well, I'm doing research in the National Technical Information Service and on mind control and hypnosis and drugs and interrogation and various things. Oh, you're talking about erasing people's memories, somebody would say. The guy across the street mowing his lawn over there, he's one of them, you know. So it was like everywhere in Washington. So if you've been in government service, the government believes that they have a right to your body, mind, and spirit, I guess. You're prepared to give your life for your country. Are you prepared to give your mind for your country, is the question we came up with.
So you're saying that there's a possibility that anyone who's been involved with the government, either in the military service or in other departments, could have had their mind tampered with?
One way or another. I was on a KPIX TV show in 1978 when I toured the United States promoting this book. We did 98 radio and television interviews in 33 cities in 30 days on that. I think it's a world's record. It was exhausting. I wouldn't advise it for anybody. But the bus broke down. There was supposed to be a ladies' club coming to the show, set up something like this. They had the local, the cook for the day, and somebody sang a song, and I was the local author for the day, you know. And none of the ladies showed up, so they threw the bus broke down, and threw the phone lines open to San Francisco. And during the break, the director wasn't sure whether to put this guy through or not. He says, we have a Navy commander on here, retired, who's had hypnotherapy for 13 years trying to recover his memory, and he says he was in a black pajama team behind on secret missions. Do you want to talk to him? And I said, sure, put him on. And we had this conversation live. There's a tape probably of it somewhere where this guy told me about this very upsetting thing where he and his men, black pajama meaning guerrilla units, would sneak around behind, he said, a fixed border in Southeast Asia, assassinating people that were charismatic local politicians. And before they reached the national level, they'd bump them off. They'd have an accident. They'd try to make it look like an accident. And they did this for 6 years, and then they were taken to Walter Reed Hospital. And he said, we all got the flu, and we went in with the flu, and we came out with cardboard memories, he said. So he was trying to recover his memories, and it took him 13 years, and finally he had. Later, after we were off, he gave me his phone number, and I called him, and I said, what was that fixed border? And he said, China.
In writing this book,
Yeah.
did you run across any people that didn't want you to write this book?
Yeah, there's an assassin in there that is now deceased, but when I was interviewing him, I wasn't supposed to take notes, and I had a little tiny, at the time, it was a specially made high-tech wire recorder, actually, not a tape recorder, a wire recorder the size of a pack of cigarettes in my pocket. And they didn't tell me. I figured it was supposed to be good for some interminable length of time. And I talked to this guy and finally this thing that sounded like a mosquito went off in my pocket. I thought I'd been caught, and this guy was well-armed and dangerous, and he had a bodyguard, and he was an assassin. And he told me about the assassination business and how they used mind control in framing patsies more than they didn't use it to motivate assassins.
Let's get into that a little bit. How a mind control, how does one, can this be performed on here in the audience before they leave, before the hour's over with? What has to happen?
Yeah, we're all the victims of one form or another of mental manipulation, I think, with advertising and the media, whether they know what they're doing or not. And basically, when I started learning about the language of the unconscious, I get very upset with myself, catching myself asleep at different times, being totally unconscious and open to suggestions and manipulation. This research, the government research that we talk about, which also includes various aspects of the UFO question, which is why I'm here tonight, is a very interesting thing that spanned 50 years. And they have come up with a Rosetta Stone for the unconscious. They've deciphered the language of the unconscious.
You say they.
They.
You know, they
Yeah.
get a lot. They get a lot of credit.
Yeah, they sure do. Well,
They're busy.
I use the term cryptocracy because in order to say who was involved in it, it's all of those agencies that hide behind the National Security Act of 1947. It's the National Security Agency, the National Programs Office, the National Reconnaissance Office, the Central Intelligence Agency, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and there are 10 or 12 others. And they have passed around this information. When the Pike and Church Committee in the 70s began to investigate, Turner and Bush, or Bush, one or the other, swept this thing off over to the Office of Naval Research and put it under some obscure, title, so they couldn't find it. Right now, this week, in March 15th, which I don't think you found covered by your press anywhere, there was a President's Commission on Radiation met, and for about 30 minutes, there were two victims of the MK Ultra research and their therapist talked to the scientist. I talked to the therapist beforehand and shared the information that I had with her, and then I talked to her afterwards, and she said she went to Washington feeling that she was going to have to convince these people that this was real. Well, the president appointed this commission of scientists, and she found out that immediately they knew what she was talking about. As a matter of fact, one of them hit the ceiling. She went up there and said she'd been listening to all the radiation victims talking, and she said, I knew what they were talking about, but they didn't know what it meant, because it was all about mind control. It was all about the use of radiation, both ionizing and non-ionizing, in mind control experiments. The same doctors, Martin T. Orne of University of Pennsylvania, Sidney Gottlieb, and L. Wilson Green, among 3 or 4 others, were the doctors she named. She and these survivors named. When she said, I know what you're talking about, it's about mind control and radiation, one of the scientists hit the ceiling and said, not now, we're not supposed to talk about this now. They knew all about this. And their questions were very succinct, to the point, and what they wanted from her, and especially the lady that was the survivor, her star patient, was information that would lead them to the documents they're missing, secret files.
But how long does it take? I mean, this has to happen doesn't happen overnight. I hope it happens over a period of time.
Well, there's a thing that, there's a guy in Alamogordo, New Mexico, that you can call up and order him to build. He's a former weapons engineer. It's in the book. He will build you a weapon to take care of your mother-in-law. If you modulate it, you can just put voices in your mother-in-law's head, and have her think somebody's talking to her. Drive her totally nuts. Or if you turn it up, it'll boil her brain in the brain pan. And this, a convicted felon, there's no laws on this so-called invisible or non-lethal or soft kill weaponry.
With that in mind, remember, guys, when we had Rose that did that channeling for us, and she said that there was a weapon that was being built and put up on the backside of Mount Lemmon somewhere.
It had
on
to do
the
with sound.
Sound and mind control type of a situation. So, but it takes a period of time, doesn't it? It doesn't happen in a week.
Well, there's different kinds. Some of it's instantaneous, and some of it takes a long period of time. The area that is coming out now because of the age of the victims, they're about from 40 to 48 years of age. They're 80% women. They were made into multiple personalities, either by their parents or their familial situation, or by the cryptocracy or the intelligence organizations. Take a guy that was a child abuser, the father or the uncle of a small child, 6-month-old child. He might be of German extraction, because we found that this was well known in German families going back 100 years. He would take the small child with the purpose in mind of making a disassociated personality, a compartmented personality out of this child. He would dip half of this baby in boiling water, almost boiling, not scalding water, and the other half in ice water. This would definitely dissociate the person. And then you begin to work on it and torture it. We have the story of Candy Jones, who was a Powers model. She wrote a book, The Control of Candy Jones, in the 50s. She was the number 2 pinup next to Betty Grable during World War II. She was one of the first monarch, so-called presidential models, that was probably used as a sex slave. She reports only her mission as a pigeon, someone who carried messages locked behind post-hypnotic blocks. Then there's also talk of Marilyn Monroe being a presidential model by the other survivors. And it has been going on a long time with this dissociated identity, because all of us have multiple personalities. You have your public persona, you have your family persona, you have you're a painter, Jim, you do whatever you do, you put on a different hat. But you're not disordered because all your personalities know about each other and they talk to each other. When you're given a trauma, when you have a trauma, you're compartmented, you have amnesia. One personality takes over so that you will survive, and then they reinforce it. So you have normally 3 Faces of Eve and Sybil in those books. They had 3 or 4 personalities. Our government found ways of fragmenting those personalities into thousands of personalities, each with their own code, cues, and triggers. So you had Luis Angel Castillo, arrested in the Philippines, attempted assassin of Marcos. You'd say one thing to him, and he'd point the gun at whoever said it and pull the trigger. Of course, they didn't give him a loaded gun. Another thing, he would fall to the floor, off the table. Another gun, he would point, another word, and he would point it.
How about Sirhan Sirhan?
Right. Sirhan, and he looked like twins. I have a picture of them if you want to see it.
What do you mean he looked like twins?
Well, they're in the book. They could be twins. I mean, when I show the picture, it'll take me a minute, so talk about something else. But when I show the picture of Sirhan and the picture of, when I show the picture of Castillo to people, say who's
I see.
Generally, they say Sirhan. The MO was the same. They both had diaries. Sirhan, Castillo believed that the cruel tricks that they play, he believed that Dulles was his father, Allen Dulles, the director of the CIA. He described
Well, you know, I remember when Al Bielek was here back in a couple of years ago and speaking at the Blue Millennium. And Walter, I know we asked you about Montauk and the Philadelphia experiment, but you said that wasn't your field, so you hadn't gotten into it. But he mentioned that there were young men at Montauk who were having like implanted, whether it was hypnosis or whatever, but that to go off, and so that in I think it was 1995 and 96, that they would commit terrorist acts. They would do these things that would then cause governments to say things are out of control. We need to, call martial law or take away your constitutional rights because
we have heard this again from the
lawlessness and all
survivors of the mind control stuff over and over again. And 96, 97, 98. 97 is a good target date. 98 is another one. They got it. Some people say that there was numerology behind the time, behind the way they planned it. But it's a very common story that you hear. These people here. This is Luis Angel Castillo, and this is Sirhan Sirhan. You can't get any closer on that. You can see the resemblance. They're even dressed alike. They left a diary. Now, Sirhan was asked in prison why he left the diary, and he said he wrote. He couldn't speak. They put him under a hypnotic trance, and they asked him why he wrote this diary. He said, practice, practice, practice. It was like 3 personalities were answering. They said, practice for what? He wrote mind control, mind control, mind control. He couldn't speak, but he could write it. And that's the way they got on. This guy did similarly. This guy here.
Okay, with that in mind, Walter, how about these people that are going around, could this possibly be the same type of people that are going around from the post office shooting these people? Could they be triggered in a way to be able
Yes.
to take our guns away from us?
Yes, yes.
I mean, with an alternative motive.
Right.
Say we want to get rid of guns, the American people aren't going to get rid of guns, so let's have somebody commit such a heinous crime with an automatic weapon that everybody will say we have to get those weapons out of there. So
yes, that's a very highly probable scenario.
Another question I had is I'd heard from different sources that during the Gulf War that mind control was being used on the Iraqi soldiers, and that was one of the reasons that they seemed to give up without any kind of resistance.
They use psychological operations, and they're very sophisticated. They used it in Waco. They played loud music day and night. They admitted that, but what they didn't tell you is that there was subliminal embedded commands in it. When those people came filing out of it, the few that survived, they were in a total daze. There are also, if you turn on something around 10 cycles, 8, 7 cycles, hertz cycles per second, it's called entrainment. You will go into an alpha state. You turn on, I think alpha is 14, you turn on a 14 cycle, you'll be entrained. You'll naturally fall into, just like if I match your breathing pattern. If you're mad at me and you're yelling at me and I have the presence of mind to match your breathing pattern, suddenly you'll find out you're not mad at me anymore. You won't know why.
Let's shift a little bit here and get back into the UFO scenario.
Yeah.
One of the things that's really common in the UFO field right now is the alien abduction scenario.
Right.
And one of the things that your research suggests is that it's possible that this is a mind control phenomenon as opposed to an actual physical abduction. That the abduction scenario that we hear over and over and over, the little grays, the lights, the operating tables, and so forth, are implanted impressions.
We have a chart comparing the ritual abuse. Both the satanic and pagan and cult ritual abuse is a scenario that's been created. It doesn't mean it doesn't really happen, but you might not really cut the baby's head off. You might just spray fake blood around and get the same effect, you know. You might give sodium amytal or something to somebody or use one of these new psychotronic weapons and confuse them and put them in a state where they're highly suggestible. The people that are describing the alien abductions, ritual abuse, and mind control survivors are all describing basically the same things. The differences are worthy of study, and it's very interesting that they have differences. Some of the things are left out completely in one of them or the other. But generally speaking, the table, the white lights, the doctor, the physical examination, the almost rape aspect of it is universal to all three of them. And then there's Persinger's research in Laurentian University in Ottawa. He's using magnetic waves. He's got an old motorcycle helmet. He was a Defense Intelligence Agency guy and developed this 20 years ago. Now he's playing around with magnetic waves, inducing happiness, sadness, and hallucinations just from playing strong magnetic fields over your head. And you have in your hand there, the New Scientist report, one of the stories on that, saying that she concludes that mind control could be done at a distance. And one of these scientists, and I can't name him, has said that we're going to Dallas and having a symposium, and I don't know if he's going to do it there, but I'll sure let you know if it happens. He said that he could take somebody from the audience and without breaking the skin, without any drugs or anything else, and not much technology, he could give them an alien abduction experience in front of 200 people. You know, and then they'll come out of it, they'll tell you they have missing time, they have all the ingredients that you've described, and yet everybody's seen him do it and how he's done it. But he's worried about the legalities, about being sued and the long-term effects of that.
What about cases where there's physical evidence, like women that are in advanced pregnancy and wake up the next morning? And
there are a lot of things about the UFO situation that really are puzzling. And I don't think you're going to get a simple answer to it. There could be several things going on here. But definitely one of them is government intervention, government created, government funded. A lot of these things take place on military bases. One ritual abuse guy in Nebraska tells the story of the alien abduction thing. Universally, the survivors of mind control have alien abduction stories that their therapists say, don't talk about this because nobody will believe you. So it's like the unspoken part of the mind control scenario. And he talked about going in, and this was in the 50s, he talked about going into caves where there were fake UFOs and big sets and elaborate constructs to convince another person. He was part of the perpetrators, but he was also under mind control. But he was convincing an adult that he was having an alien abduction experience. Another, in Maryland, a woman was a little child, and she was used, also mind control, multiple personality child, was used inside of a suit of a very high-tech thing back in those days. Sounds like something you'd see on the set of Babylon 5, where she articulated the little gray. She was the fake gray, or thereabout, or something like that.
Seems like a tremendous amount of trouble to go
It's very, it must be very expensive.
for what purpose?
Well, for example, suppose your president of the United States is a pedophile,
Okay.
and we can supply him with little children to molest, and we can film this, and we can then control that man. And maybe we do it long before he's president. Maybe he's got some deviant behavior. He likes sex with animals or whatever. You could conceive something very strange and bizarre. And we can film this. We can supply the victim for him. It'll never squeal. It's a mind-controlled child or whatever. Mind-controlled dog, if it is, or whatever it is. We can then control him. Blackmail, bribery, threats, standard operating procedure for any Nazi regime.
Now you said this scenario, this kind of got put into place in 1947.
Yeah, that's what's curious about it, and that's another crossover with the UFO thing. June, July of 1947, you had the big flap.
Well, we had the crash at Roswell.
The crash at Roswell, Corona, Aztec.
And not only that, but then June of that, that's when the ships are spotted over the Cascades.
Yes,
Kenneth Arnold.
the word Kenneth Arnold, the first term flying saucer came. Okay, September of 1947, the National Security Act was passed with no debate through both House and Senate. Zoom. You've never seen an act as meaningful as that. Now, what the National Security Act does is it suspends your Bill of Rights. It says that in the interest of national security, your rights can be suspended. It's a state of national emergency. And we've been living in that since 1947. There are two bills now, one's before the House, one's before the Senate, sponsored by Dole and others, including John Warner, Senate Intelligence Committee, to limit the War Powers Act part of that. Apparently the president can commit troops without anybody's consent and turn them straight over to the UN, and we'll never see them again. They're trying to limit that. But I think that's a cheap and shallow compromise. I think we have to repeal the National Security Act, just like our parents repealed the Volstead Act so we could have a beer legally.
What is the definition of national security?
Nobody knows. There's never been any case law. And I guess when one of the boys of the Department of Defense card goes into the judge's chamber, I don't know how you get the judges to go along with this. Maybe it's the blackmail thing again. Say in the interest of national security, case dismissed, and the case is dismissed time and time again. The classic case was the two guys that were caught smuggling heroin sewn up in the dead bodies of the Vietnam soldiers. They went to trial. DOD comes, guy from the DOD says, in the interest of national security, we're not going to try this case dismissed. So it suspends our law, it makes a laughing stock of our Constitution. We've been living under this 50 years. If we didn't have a National Security Act, we wouldn't have had the assassination of the Kennedys and King probably. We wouldn't have had the Iran-Contra, the Watergate, so many other things. We would probably have a golden age because we'd find out the technology that we have, which is being kept secret.
Well, going into the technology that we have, there's a gentleman or there was about a year and a half ago in Albuquerque, I think his base is in Albuquerque, and Ed Dames that talks about this type of mind control, what is it?
Scitech. He's a partner of John Alexander in a company called Scitech. John Alexander is former lieutenant colonel, retired now at a big national laboratory down there. He's one of the main exponents of so-called non-lethal weaponry. Well, non-lethal weaponry will kill you. I call it invisible warfare or invisible weaponry. Some of them call it soft kill weaponry. But it's, you know, you saw the thing in the New York, the Wall Street Journal, very funny things like they put sticky glue on the tank treads, but there's also this insidious stuff that fellow in Alamogordo will build you and sell you for $9.95, you know.
Well, he stated, and I called him up, I read an article in the UFO magazine.
Yeah.
And he said that the Roswell crash was nothing but a mind control operation, that it actually did not crash, that it was all contrived. The people that are telling these stories were duped into this, and that science has been able to do this for a long time, and he called it remote viewing.
Uh-huh.
And I asked him to be on the show because he had written this article and turned it in, and it really kind of left it open, up in the air. A year ago, he got with a bunch of other people that he was going to prove that this is what was going on, and there's a big secret meeting, like in the UFO circles, there's always secret meetings. And it never happened, and he wouldn't give me an on-air interview at all. He said, read it in the book. Well, the book hasn't come out.
Right, no, it's still making the rounds in New York.
But we have remote viewing, and I asked him, what exactly is remote viewing? Tell me what that is. And he said, well, right now, I don't know who you are. You're on the telephone any more than you can't see me standing in a forest because I'm camouflaged. But the minute I start to wave my hands, you'll know exactly where I am, and you'll be able to follow my movement throughout it. Once they know who you are, once they know the waving of the hands, they can be able to identify you. They can follow you wherever they can. And he claims that he can teach you to do this if you come
He's got
up
a
with
class. It's very interesting.
X amount of dollars.
And I think Ingo Swann and the Stanford Research Institute were the authors of most of this stuff. They did some amazing remote viewing experiments in the 50s, 60s. Ingo Swann, Pat Price, and who was it, Uri Geller or somebody else? Three of them. Price is dead. Geller is tired of working for the Mossad, and that leaves Ingo Swann, who wrote a book about seeing the future, and I think he's written some of the stuff. And I think they give Ingo Swann credit in their manual on the course that they teach. And Ingo Swann is an amazing psychic with immense gifts. I contacted him in 1978 because I wanted him to remote view for the citizens. I wanted him to go inside a Cheyenne mountain as we had done with other remote viewers in another experiment, and he was scared to death because he'd been working for the CIA, and he said, oh, they're all not bad guys, they're not bad guys. And the guy was trembling on the phone. It didn't take any remote viewing to tell how frightened he was of what he was involved with.
Well, in the book out there, you read the book.
They have also developed blocks for that, so somebody can't do what you're describing. That's what I've heard.
Well, then there's probably a periscope that gets around the block. You know what I mean? It's all a mind game anyway, and isn't this all Maya anyway?
Let me ask you this. You know, let's run the clock back a bit. It's World War II.
Yeah.
Right. And we're fighting for our lives against the Japanese, the Germans, and so forth. And we can justify building an atomic bomb.
Right.
We can justify this kind of technology. We have a heinous enemy that's going to destroy us.
Right.
So we can justify
right.
Subverting the Constitution,
yes.
suspending the Constitution, suspending constitutional rights
right.
to protect ourselves from this heinous enemy. And well, it's now 1995. Who's the heinous enemy that we can justify this kind of activity?
You know, remember Walt Kelly's famous line that Pogo said, I've seen the enemy and the enemy is us. That's what it looks like. I think we're being used. I think that there's a terrible attitude in the circles of power. And I don't think that your press, I don't think that your good Republicans, I don't think Newt Gingrich and his contract with America means anything without the repeal of the National Security Act, because there are two Americas. There's the America that lives under the illusion that it elects a president and elects its leaders and that everybody's honest and open and above board. And then there's the other America that is involved in murder, rape, blackmail.
Well, I think you get this feeling that if you talk like this, people think, oh gosh, another conspiracy. It's just like there's a conspiracy behind every bush, and it's a paranoid, there's been stuff in the paper saying that, you know, this is all a lot of paranoia going around, and it's, so, you know, it's like, where's the balance
Well,
here?
are you from the 60s? I am. And we used to have a saying back in the 60s that said, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. And that really applies to this thing. There's a conspiracy of people from all walks of life to do, to salute the flag. I mean, do you ever look at the dollar bill? It's a funny-looking little thing. They're going to trade that for a hamburger? I mean, it seems like a hamburger is worth much more than that piece of paper. So we're all involved in conspiracies. We're all programmed from the time where we go to school. You've seen your children lose their abilities, be disempowered by peer pressure in schools. We're all involved in a conspiracy of thought of one kind or another. Most of it's unconscious. I'm not saying that there's a insidious plot behind most of it, but there's an insidious stupidity behind most of it, and we don't know what we're doing. But now we've awakened, because this information, that is the Rosetta Stone for the unconscious, is coming out. It's going to be in schools. Your kids are going to learn how to flash memorize stuff by holding them up and memorizing them. I have 2 Phi Beta Kappa kids that I taught these techniques to, and Tony Robbins can teach you if you want to go to school, and it's everywhere. Mind control is everywhere. You find it the positive side and there's the negative side, but it's just part of becoming obsolete, you see, because when something is obsolete, you notice it. So secrecy is obsolete because of the information age. We notice that. And we're all becoming one anyway. I mean, there's bound to be a greater love and understanding and harmony. And then on the process of getting to that, we're going to say, holy cow, we've been asleep. We've been used. We're victims. You know, who are we going to blame? We're going to blame our parents? We're going to blame the government? Who are we going to? Nobody to blame but us. So we all must wake up in our chairs right where we and learn about these things, because it's inevitably it's a great gift to us. It's the golden age.
I was just going to say, you know, even though this is like an uncomfortable subject for a lot of people, that unless you're aware, you can't change anything. You can't re-empower ourselves and find our, take back our power, take back our minds, and really start thinking.
And these people were thinking the unthinkable. J.B. Rhind, Duke University, telepathy experiments, was funded by the CIA in the 50s. There have been many other repeated studies. Telepathy is everyone's birthright. You know, reading people's minds and all this remote viewing, or whatever you want to call it, astral travel or whatever it is. It's everybody does it. Seeing the future, all of this stuff is part of human nature. We all do this. But then, and they proved that they could do it. But then they put out a disinformation campaign that said it can't be done. So that's just like the UFO question.
Well, you see that with small children. The children are born with these gifts, but you see as they're slowly enculturated that well, you know, Johnny, it's not right that you're talking to your invisible friend there. That you know, there's no such thing, and gradually, you know, this is trained out of us.
Right.
So you're saying that that basically the core of who we are, we still maintain that. We still can have that within us. And it's just getting back in touch with that.
Absolutely. And it's empowerment. It's part of your belief system. Neurolinguistics programming says there's no such thing as genius or talent. It says if we can find out what you believe, let's say you're the greatest golfer in the world, if I can find out what you believe and how you syntax the process, the context, what you see, hear, and feel in which order as you're doing the great golf game, I can duplicate your results. And that's true of anybody, of anything, of any function.
One of the things we've seen, hopefully we see it melting away, is the effect of ridicule.
Oh, really?
In the UFO phenomena. People have these experiences and they're ridiculed, and so that in itself is a mind control technique or tool.
Well, that's very clearly, and I think you'll find in the documentations as well, the documents have already been uncovered by the Freedom of Information Act. Not that you're going to find any answers that way, because those documents can be manipulated, but you're going to already find evidence of a concerted plan to ridicule people. For every yes, for every real experience, there is a no. I mean, I've seen lights in the Chiricahua Mountains in the 60s. and like ping pong balls in water. They all got together in formation, shot across the sky silently, and then the helicopters from Fort Huachuca showed up and swept the mountainside. I can tell the difference between a helicopter and whatever it was that I saw. And it didn't, and it stands to reason, just simple common sense, if those were ours, they wouldn't have sent helicopters before. Mm-hmm. And I also interviewed, I was the editor of a newspaper in Washington, in Port Townsend, Washington. I interviewed the old sheriff. He said, yeah, I remember we started talking about UFOs. He said, remember back in 1946, right after the war? He said, I wasn't there. He says, I left all the stuff. He said, we got hundreds of sightings. He said, there was UFOs hovering all over the Straits of Juan de Fuca, right between Canada. He said, the first flight of Marine, what was it, P-51 Mustangs was scrambled, and the first time that the United States ever fired on a UFO was in that incident over Port Townsend, Washington, and we couldn't find the document. We went up to the courthouse, and we went through all the stuff, gone. You know? But I'm sure there are people that remember it. That's something for your network to research, that one.
Well, one of the things, like I mentioned, that the ridicule effect is starting to melt a little bit. That the more we see shows like this, like sightings and encounters and so forth, more and more people say, hey, I had an experience like that, and well, maybe it is okay for me to share it with my neighbor, my friend.
And this question came to me when I saw that 1947 date. Mm-hmm. Here's the Roswell thing. Here is the old, what's his name? Mac Brazel, a sheep herder, sheep rancher. Common as the clay, a good man, believed in his country, simple guy, goes and turns in the artifacts of the UFO, and they arrest him, and they keep him prisoner. And they didn't torture him, but they put a gun to his head and pulled the trigger. And they threatened his children and his family. Then they just paid him off and made him sign a contract. He walked away doing well, moved out of town, bought himself a new truck, bought himself some kind of business or other. Mm-hmm. But he never talked to again. He said, I don't believe in my government after that, and I'll never. Here they were abusing this guy's civil rights. They must have realized that they were caught catch-22. It was after the war, So then they said, we better get this National Security Act in place, because we're going to, if there is there's aliens from outer space would explain the National Security Act. It would be the only justifiable reason I could think of having it. And if we're adult about this thing, I think there's enough of us that are not going to turn into the Aboriginal reaction, where we lose our way and and have despair at meeting a culture with higher technology. Mm-hmm. But the higher technology could just be us too.
You have one of the articles, one of the chapters in your book is about the UFO enigma.
Yes.
You're not saying that all of the abductees or contactees or people that have come in contact or claim to have come in contact are multi-personalities or dysfunctional or under mind control.
No, not. But now, if you meet a real alien, from a real ship, don't you think the government's going to be at your doorstep real fast? And if they've got this mind control technology, don't you think they're going to sort of interrogate you with it, find out what you know? And then don't you think that they're going to smudge the record if they're trying to keep it a secret and just sort of erase things around the edges? Or maybe, then the other theory is, maybe it's the alien guys that are running the government, behind the scenes, Mm-hmm. And so it goes. We don't know until we repeal the National Security Act. Once we repeal the National Security Act, maybe we'll find out.
With the amount of people that are coming out recently, or lately anyway, with contacts or claimants of being abducted, the government would have had to done a horrendous job. I mean, how can you do 30 million people?
Yeah.
You just
that's
can't.
true.
I mean,
well,
so
that's the Roper poll, though. See, nobody knows.
There's some truth. Well, we're in the field.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't care about a poll. I talk to people every
30
day.
million is what, 10%? Mm-hmm.
They say 3%.
3%.
Isn't that 3% of the population that claim to have had some kind of a contact with it? And a difference in why only in the United States, it doesn't happen only in the United States.
No,
it happens in other countries also.
Yeah.
So it isn't so much that, and I don't feel that the people, I don't want to bring in the fear factor behind this. I want to end the show on a very positive note. One of the reasons for bringing you on is to inform the people. Bob Dean says if you don't know what's going on, you're simply not informed. And I truly believe that. I think all three of us believe that, or we wouldn't be doing what we're doing sitting here.
Except we must remember the lines of Goethe, who said, "Danger fosters the rescuing power." A lot of the great horrors of the world have become the benefit of mankind. Things of war, surgery, inventions of war, and the war machine have served us in the end. If we're encountering a higher technology and true aliens from another place, and then, God forbid, reptilians, we're going to have a lot to deal with. There's going to be fear, but we have to learn to deal with fear. The only thing to fear is fear itself. You know, so we have to be empowered. We have to claim our space. And this is like getting out of the playpen of life. This planet is the playpen. I think we've got a long way to go. I think we've been disempowered. I think we're entering the information age. I feel it's only a metaphor for our potential. I think we're going to get into everywhere at onceness, just like the information. It's everywhere at once.
I think the technology is a metaphor for our true potential.
That's what I see.
I think that telephone is a metaphor for telepathy.
Yes.
And cars and transportation is, I mean, I think eventually we will be able to teleport ourselves wherever we need to go. I think we've just
I think we can do it right now. If we can only find that guy that already does it, we can duplicate his result.
I think if we believed it 100% without one shred of doubt, we could do anything.
We did. Tony Robbins taught us how to walk on fire when we were studying neurolinguistics programming. So we did a lot of firewalks, and one of them we did for the Guinness Book of Records, and it was probably as long as this room. The trouble was they used mesquite, and 40% of the people got their feet burned. Explain that. Why didn't the other 60%? Very interesting question. But Tony made an interesting comment. He said, show me somebody that walks on water, then I'll teach you all how to walk on water. And it's true. If one of us can do it, if it's possible for anyone in the world, it's possible for everyone. And I think that applies to the aliens and the Nordics and all the rest of them, too. If it's possible for them, it's possible for us.
Well, you and I are, I get involved with this case, the Robert Moody case. There's a gentleman here in town that has been tried for a double homicide, and he claims that in his mind, in the act of committing these crimes, that he was just a participant, a viewer, a person that had no control over his actions at all. And so I needed more information in talking about, I wanted us here at UFOAZ to make sure that we covered that story so it was played the way that it should be played, because he's claiming that aliens told him to do this.
Yes.
Now, there was a lady that called me up that watches the show all the time, and she's probably watching right now, that said that there was another case similar to this, and I think she said, I have it written down, 1989, that this other gentleman killed, murdered, and he claimed aliens told him to do it. You sat with Moody in the. Is there any? Can you?
Well,
a short time that you.
He seems like from our conversations and the tapes I've seen, you did 8 or 10 hours of tape. He seems like a perfectly rational fellow who tells you this bizarre story, that is, that he wants to get the lethal injection, and the aliens have promised him that he's going to be resurrected. Trouble is that he's got all factory blocks, and he's got a past that fits the perfect mind control profile. Military parent, abuse of the family by the father, and the various other things. The trouble with psychiatry and most psychologists is that they don't know anything about this mind control stuff yet, and they can't diagnose it. And it would be a real shame to see somebody that has been mind controlled by the government to murder somebody, let's say, to murder for a purpose, let's say, which we don't know. But it could be that he killed these people under control, and it's something not to be ruled out. It's got to be examined by the experts. Unfortunately, right now, the mental health field is like dark in the dark ages.
Well, in interviewing him, I told him flat out that you kill these people. I hope you get everything you deserve, and he admits to that.
He wants to he wants to get the lethal injection. There's no argument.
No, he doesn't.
Unfortunately, his defense attorney, being a good defense attorney, wants to have him declared insane, which is not insane because he functions perfectly well. But the only thing the psychiatrist could come up with on the test, as far as I know, Ted, and maybe you may know more about it, is that he's been a malinger. They think there's some indication of malingering. But he said by his own admission in that last interview that he did that he's got a personality disorder. Now, is it a multiple personality disorder? He said no, but he exhibits all the signs, as far as I could tell, and I'm just a layman.
Mm-hmm. So, do you think that this, if what we think is mind control,
yeah,
this could be happening all over the country and not getting the press?
Of course. There was no press at the President's Committee on Radiation. There was one guy from an Access TV show there with a camera who filmed everything. Hooray for Access TV. Right. And we're going to try to get in touch with him, and maybe we can have it to show sometime. Right. But otherwise, nobody was there to cover it.
When you talk about this radiation convention, what is this?
It's not a convention. It's
not a convention.
The president appointed a committee.
A committee, I'm sorry.
Hazel O'Leary, the Department of Energy, released 3 million pages of documentation, and there's another 3 million that are classified. The president appointed a panel of scientists to investigate giving radioactive plutonium to children, for example. Now, we have a high incident of Graves' disease, where your thyroid goes bananas and you lose your thyroid, and you have to take thyroxine, I guess, the rest of your life, whatever it is, some chemical the rest of your life to balance your endocrine system, among mind control victims, survivors. And it turns out that Martin Orne and L. Wilson Green and others were involved with the same doctors that were using and abusing these female children. And one of the forms of abuse was exposure to radiation of various kinds.
How did they get a hold of these children? Where were they?
Well, famous story of she was on Roger's show. She's very articulate and fully recovered. She was a presidential model who was involved with Manuel Noriega and George Bush and Ronald Reagan and Dick Cheney. She tells very lurid and disgusting tales about her experiences that way. And she's written a book about it. It's about to come out, and it's going to be a sensation. She remembers early childhood memories, her father abusing her, her uncle abusing her, being involved in child pornography. Father was in the Army. Military got a hold of him and said he was selling porn through the mails. He got arrested for selling the porn through the mails. And instead of being tried and convicted, he was taken aside by the intelligence people and said, look, we can use you. We'll teach you how to do this. You turn your daughter over to us when you're done. Here's the way you program her. And then it just went on for her entire life. Now we find multi-generational aspects to this. Her child has also been used, and her brother was used. And we find that often there's 3 or 4 generations involved.
We're running close to time here, I think. But before we go out, anybody interested in this book or getting to know a little bit more about Operation Mind Control, where can they get in touch with you?
At the Freedom of Thought Foundation, P.O. Box 35072, Tucson, Arizona 85740.
Say that again, please.
Freedom of Thought Foundation, Post Office Box 35072, Tucson 85740. Or you can reach me, Free Thought, FREETHOT, at americaonline.com on the computer, on email.
All right. Is this something that the population should be afraid of? Is it something that we can guard against? Is it... I want to bring this...
Well, it's something we have to educate ourselves about. And go to an NLP class and learn how to do it. It's a great aid. It's a great tool. You know how to do it already. Everybody does it. You just don't know how to duplicate your results. You just don't know what you're doing until you chunk it down and look at it and make it, lay it out on the table and say, breathing pattern, 90% of communication is behavioral, 5% is tonal, 5% is content. This is all from a side of the psychotronic weapons or the invisible weaponry. That's a whole other question. And I think we've got to become active just like we did in the 60s. We've got to repeal the National Security Act, just like we protested the war in Vietnam to survive.
What is NLP?
Neurolinguistics programming.
Can you describe that a bit?
Neurolinguistics programming is a kitchen sink full of psychological tools that were uncovered by the 50 years of research that was involved in Operation Mind Control. I mean, it's one name for it. There are many other names for it, Ericksonian techniques and various other things, but it's really basic. Now, if you add all the electronic stuff to that, you still are back to what you see, hear, and feel in which order, your belief systems and your syntax, and duplicating the results.
What about something as more or less involved as meditation, you know, really feeling that you are an empowered person, using your mind, using your consciousness?
Right. The NLP teaches you how to make up your mind. That's the most important thing you can do, is to know what you want, know where you're going, know who you are, and be clear about it. Check your ecology, because we all have these little vested interest personalities that may be at war with ourselves, that keeps us from succeeding in certain tasks unconsciously. I call it the language of the unconscious instead of neurolinguistics programming, because it is the language of the unconscious. 90% of your brain, you don't know what it does. Nobody knows what it does. 90% of your day, you're unconscious normally. That leaves you with 10%, and you think you're in charge. Your unconscious is in charge. If you want to get a table at a restaurant that's crowded, you can give the waiter a $10, $20 bill these days, lie and tell him you're a doctor and you got to go do an operation. Or you can say, that smells good, that looks good, you hear that fan, it needs oiling. Now you're going to put me at the top of the list. I know your rules are contrary, but you're going to put me at the top of the list. Did it rain here yesterday? And he won't remember you giving him the embedded command to put him at the top of the list. He will get you the table, and he won't know why he's doing it. And the reason he won't remember it, because you got him off thinking if it rained here yesterday. And that's an example of neurolinguistics programming. Ask somebody to tell you something that is good that they never had and they don't want. Tell me something good that you never had and you don't want. Watch your eyes.
And everybody.
I'm trying to think of something.
Watch your eyes. So you can get a camera.
Oh, no.
No. Well, what happens is you go around, is it up here, is it over here? That's called a transderivational search. Now, if I were an insidious operator and I saw you doing that, I would say, tonight you're going to have a dream and you're going to find your path of bliss, and you can have it all, but you got to find out what your bliss is, and then you're going to fulfill it when you wake up in the morning. And if you don't do it in one night, in one dream, you're going to do it tomorrow night and the next night and the next night, because we can all have it all, and we can all have our path of bliss, and that's the only game in town. And you know, did it rain here yesterday?
I've got to stop right there. I've got to save you here.
You got mind controlled.
We've got mind control. Well, thanks a lot for being with us, and I wish you a lot of luck. And I know you're going to be taking one of the cameramen with you down there, and take care of him. He's a good guy.
Yeah.
I want to tell everybody that next week Wendell C. Stevens will be on with Jim Del Toso. We're going to be talking about what really went on with the Meyer case, and for once and for all, try to figure out what the hell went on. And then following that, hopefully we're going to be able to have Jerry Wills back on with Linda Gordon, Susan Gordon. But until then, I think there's a conflict on time, but we'll be getting back with you. So stay tuned with us, and if you like what you see, support UFOAZ and a lot of the other public access in your area. Thanks a lot.